Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Wagner, Chair of the Hatfield Planning Board. I'm going to call what will now be an informational meeting to order. We do not have a quorum tonight. Paul Labby is here with me this evening, and Wilma Davis, our administrative assistant. Our plan for tonight anyway was to meet with other officials here in town to discuss recreational marijuana and the steps that the town has at its disposal and may need to take here over the next couple months. Actually, since you all are here and represent different departments, if I could have everyone just sort of introduce themselves to the camera, starting with Ed, that'd be great.
Ed Jaworski.
Mike DeKoschak, Police Department.
John Roberts, Superintendent.
Steve Gahn, Fire Department.
Marlene Michalski, Town Administrator.
Kyle Scott, Building Inspector.
Okay, great. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know that some of you have a meeting at 7, so I want to get through some of this detail quickly and then open it up for any conversation. So I wanted to just show everyone and make sure everyone's on the same page on a few key items of importance with the Cannabis Control Commission. These are the key dates that we should all keep in mind. March 15th is when the final regs from the Cannabis Control Commission are expected to be released. As you probably have read in the paper, they're holding public hearings right now around the state. There have been some locally that folks have attended. April 1st, which is not very far off, is when the after the final regs, 2 weeks later, are when applications for marijuana establishments are first to be accepted by the Cannabis Control Commission. So a very fast turnaround. And then really just a few months later is the expected target date for the first licenses of marijuana establishments. So those establishments would include retailers, cultivators, manufacturers, transportation entities as well. So there's a number of definitions of various marijuana establishments in the regs. So what kind of options does the town of Hatfield have? And if you keep those dates that I just gave you in mind, well, we could do nothing. We could choose to not do anything. However, if the Cannabis Control Commission gets an application from someone wanting to do business in Hatfield, and they meet all of the requirements and they are eligible and get a license, the Cannabis Control Commission will issue a license, and they'll base it on whatever our current zoning allows in terms of retail or manufacturing. So for example, we have zones in town business center, we have business zones around town that allow for retail. If someone were to decide that they want to set up shop in Hatfield and we don't make any changes relative to where we might allow recreational marijuana establishments, the Cannabis Control Commission would look at our current zoning bylaws and say, well, retail is allowed in town center business, which is right across the street. And we could have a retail establishment, say, next to where the market is right now, because that's where we currently allow retail. So I think doing nothing is not a very good option for the town, and it's something that the planning board has discussed at previous meetings. Now, the town can postpone making a decision about marijuana establishments, basically passing a moratorium. The Attorney General has allowed moratoriums to go through December 18, so just till the end of this year. But we have to keep in mind that we would have to bring this before the town at town meeting, which means that the earliest that we could adopt a moratorium would be May 8th or 10th, whenever that meeting is. But by then, applications are already accepted. So we may get an application, again, going to the Cannabis Control Commission in April, looking to establish a business here in town, and our moratorium would be literally the cart after the horse. So postponing it would probably not be a particularly good option either. Now, we could ban marijuana establishments entirely. Again, we wouldn't be able to take action on this until May town meeting, and because the town passed the referendum back in 2016 not by a lot, but 52.3% for, 47.7% against. The state law now requires that because we adopted the referendum in town, to ban marijuana establishments would require us to actually have a vote, another vote. And so, Marlene, you're here. If a ban warrant article was adopted at May town meeting, would we be able to even get it on the May ballot? It seems like that's not enough
No,
time.
because actually the town clerk needs the ballot questions. She has an April due date for ballot questions.
So in all likelihood, that might be then at either a special election or at the November election, which would be the general election. So again, we're sort of behind the 8 ball, if you will, because of the dates of the Cannabis Control Commission set out in terms of accepting applications and actually issuing licenses by, say, June 1st. The town may choose not to ban marijuana establishments, but restrict the amount of the number of retail establishments below 20% of our off-premise liquor licenses. Again, if you want to restrict the number of retail entities to less than 20% of our off-premise liquor licenses, which right now is 7, so that would be basically less than 2, so you'd have to be down to 1, you would have to do the same thing. You'd have to go to a vote of the town. So the last option is to permit and regulate. And so not knowing what the town might do with these 3 prior options, the planning board started to work on bylaws in anticipation of, if none of these were of interest to the town or didn't come to fruition, we would be prepared to have bylaws in place that would permit but regulate and restrict the location, time, and character of marijuana establishments in town. And so I shared with those of you that were invited to the meeting the current draft that we have. It's very much a work in progress. It's fashioned after the ordinance that's been adopted in East Hampton. We looked at where, for example, we allow manufacturing now. We looked at where we allow retail, but we narrowed it. So, for example, we are narrowing the retail establishment. We're recommending that the town allow only 2 retail establishments in town, which would meet the 20% threshold, because we have 7 off-premise liquor licenses, so 20% of 7 is 1.4, so if we allow for 2, we are certainly meeting the state's requirement in terms of not having to have that vote, a special vote. We are looking at restricting the location of those businesses to essentially the business districts out on Route 5, which actually probably makes the most sense from a retail standpoint anyway, because of traffic patterns and opportunity to have visibility. But so, I mean, unless, Paul, you have anything you want to add, I'd like to open it up to the folks in the room to get your sense as to what your thoughts are on this subject generally, and particularly the police department and the fire department. I was hoping the Board of Health would be here because, of course, they're going to have to be very involved in allowing when establishments do come in terms of reviewing their license and making sure they're meeting the codes that are set up for sanitary requirements, particularly in the manufacturing area. It's quite extensive if you read the 107-page rules that are available from the Cannabis Control Commission, the requirements that are set for marijuana establishments, cultivators as well as manufacturers. And before I open it up, the other thing I should point out that if the town were to choose to allow recreational marijuana establishments in town, we can assess up to a 3% local tax on the sale of marijuana here in town. That money can come to the town free and clear. We can decide how we wish to use it, if we want to earmark it in any way or just have it go into the general fund. The other thing that we can negotiate, and the select board would be very involved in this, is we can negotiate host agreements with marijuana establishments that would be upfront costs, in effect impact fees. So for example, if the police department determines that, well, okay, if we're going to have these establishments, we're probably going to expect a few more calls because of trespass or perhaps even break-ins, that kind of thing, that's going to put some stress on our department. The host agreement, which there's limits as to how big the host agreement can be, but you can negotiate a host agreement up front that would be used to offset some of those costs associated with managing and hosting a marijuana establishment here in the community.
No, I just had a question on the bylaws.
Yeah.
The bylaws you're presenting, they would have to go to town meeting, correct?
Correct.
So right now, technically, if somebody was to apply without any bylaws in place, how does that work? Say they can do what they want until we have bylaws, and then do the bylaws supersede? Or how does that work?
So if Kyle Scott, the building inspector, has any thing to add to this, my understanding is that if we are going to town meeting with bylaws in May, and the Cannabis Control Commission gets an application in April, and they come to us and they say, we've gotten an application, and we say we are, proffering bylaws to be considered at our May town meeting, they will take those into consideration because it's such a close
I agree.
time period. Yeah.
So they would hold off until we decided whether to vote in the bylaws or not.
Right, exactly. Or at a minimum, they would look at the proposed bylaws to see that we are, allowing but restricting and putting in certain requirements. For example, that towns are allowed to set a minimum distance away from certain other uses for marijuana establishments. The state requires, if there's no bylaw in a town, a marijuana establishment cannot be any closer than 500 feet to a school or a daycare center, a location where children congregate.
And application date doesn't make issuance date anyway, so just because they make application the first part of April, there's quite a bit of checking to do on the applicant, so realistically, that's not gonna happen in any case.
Right, yeah, that's true. We are, in our proposed bylaw, we are keeping it at the 500 feet so that there be no establishment allowed within 500 feet of a school or a daycare center or a facility like that, college, community college, which of course we don't have in town, but the whole gamut of educational facilities. We also are looking at limiting certain marijuana establishments from, so for example, our bylaw right now, the draft, does not allow any recreational retail sales within 300 feet of a residence, or in a building that has any residential units in the building. So therefore, to really separate the retail establishment from any kind of residence, which of course that's a stricter limit than we have on off-premise liquor sales.
So right now, your intent is to present bylaws for the May town.
That's right, and we are scheduling a full. We'll have another meeting. We have another scheduled meeting on March 4th. Is it the 4th? Is the first Monday of March? First Wednesday of March, where we'll have an opportunity to discuss this amongst the board members.
First Wednesday of March is the 7th.
I was just going to say March 1st.
Oh, March 7th, that's right, yeah, that's right, March.
April 4th
Yeah,
is the,
April 4th, and then we'll hold a hearing, a public
That will
hearing
be
on
the
April
hearing.
4th, which I've discussed with Marlene, meets the time schedule for getting the final warrant language to you all in time for town meeting.
Well, when you finalize the bylaws, is it possible to put that on the town page so people could read it before
Oh, yeah.
the meeting?
The warrant
Yeah.
will be posted on the town's website.
yeah,
Yeah, and we'll actually post the draft on our website as well, so that people have a chance to read it. we're pretty much following existing use table. So for example, manufacturing right now is allowed in, light industrial business zones with, site plan approval and review. So there'll be those requirements. Cultivation, we have our agricultural areas in town. I should note that the cultivation of marijuana is not by state law considered an agricultural activity that then enjoys some of the exemptions that agriculture does under planning and zoning. So while it is an agricultural activity, it will be a regulated agricultural activity as opposed to growing corn or soybeans or potatoes or vegetables.
Now, that would change the tax rate on that land if they change the use of that land to grow marijuana, is that what we're saying?
That's a great question, Ed, because I would think that we would need to find out if they would still be eligible for 61A. Even though it does, so the law does, the amendments that were passed by the legislature to the referendum a year ago this past summer, they specifically do not give the exemptions that are afforded agriculture under planning and zoning to, for example, that agriculture can occur in any zone and so on and so forth. Those kinds of exemptions are not granted to marijuana cultivation. But whether or not marijuana cultivation is considered an agricultural activity for 61A, that's a very good question. We'll need to look into that, and certainly our assessor and finance department. Now, the other thing that Marlene and Ed, you should be aware of, it's not the planning board's jurisdiction, but if we choose to, and again, regardless of what we decide to do on postpone or ban or restrict, I think it's good to have these in our pocket. If we were to choose to elect the full 3% local sales tax, that needs to be a warrant article that we need to actually officially adopt, that we will assess a 3% surcharge or local tax on marijuana sales. And that's not something that would fall in the zoning, planning and zoning bylaw. That's a separate article that would be handled by the finance committee or perhaps the board of selectmen. Because I've been following this very closely in what the other local communities have done. And I know, for example, in Northampton, the council is considering both the zoning bylaws and authorization to allow them to assess the 3% tax.
With the dates postponing, is the commission going to take that into effect, that we're asking for a postponement till 12/18? So when they get an application that's in April, are they considering the fact that we're asking for a postponement?
That's a very good question. What I have gathered is that, and from the material that we're getting from the municipal league, they're saying that their feeling is that the postponement would probably only really be good until the end of May, because at that point the Cannabis Control Commission has to make some decisions on these licenses. Because the moratorium doesn't necessarily say that you will or won't. It just says that you want to spend more time thinking about it.
Right.
And so the Cannabis Control Commission, my feeling would be, and from what I'm gathering from this paperwork, would say, well, we can't hold this person up until December if that's when you've decided to do it, because you may choose to allow it, and you'd be holding somebody up by 9 months.
Okay. So our only true option is to permit it and regulate it.
Permit it and regulate it, or to ultimately ban it.
Ban it completely,
Ban
but
it
that takes
completely.
another vote.
You might have one establishment get in or through the licensing procedures that are going to happen this spring, but then ban anything going forward.
The physical address is actually what holds the license with who owns it, correct? So if the site needs site plan review, how can the commission issue the license without the municipality reviewing the site in any case?
We review the site, but we can't unduly restrict it
Right,
unless our bylaws so states.
right, right.
So I guess an example of that would be if, say, we decide that we're not going to do anything, which I think, I think the planning board at least wants to get something before the town and,
Sure.
for it to consider at May town meeting. But, as I mentioned earlier, right now we
I
allow,
was more getting at that, your board needs time to do their review, if the
Right.
site is appropriate. and
Right.
So forth, without the commission issuing a license to an address and an individual that might go out and speculate on property, oh, this would be a great place for some type of.
no, my understanding is they need to actually have a physical location as to where they want to do it.
Yes.
Right, and
exactly.
so then it would then fall under, us reviewing it, but of course, if right now our only option is our current bylaws, then we might have establishments in places that we wouldn't necessarily have wanted them.
The state could come in and have you, they could open it up with, if we had no bylaw at all,
They can locate where.
they could locate as long as it's in a district that we would have any retail,
Right.
okay?
Or
But if we-
manufacturing.
Yeah, or manufacturing, but if we have something at least working on it,
Store could give up his lease and they could.
that's right, sisters could be whatever, but it couldn't because there's an apartment above it.
Right.
Well,
So,
that's
so, it limits, this thing is really limiting as to where it can happen.
If we were to, if the town were to go, you'd have to vote a town meeting to ban, but one or two could slip under the radar.
Right.
If,
And
yeah,
then you'd have the same meeting, you'd have to vote to assess the 3% tax.
Right. You'd want to, so,
Do you know what I mean? It really would cost.
Well, we definitely want the 3% on this town meeting.
right, so.
No, but I mean,
So what,
Yeah.
so,
seriousness, yeah.
so for example, if you were following in the news recently in South Hadley, and the debate is, I think, still out there as to whether or not, the town wants to go with it or not, they had basically.
didn't they accept?
They had a cornucopia of measures that they were considering because they wanted to be prepared for any outcome. So they were looking at ban, they were looking at moratorium, the 3%, and they're considering zoning bylaws at the planning board because again, they want to make sure that they've got all of their bases covered in the event that, say, they do go with the ban, but then it fails at the voting booth.
My understanding is the cultivation and the cutting of the crop is also taxed at a higher rate due to the fact that that crop can be grown in Hatfield and shipped out and never sold in your dispensaries locally. So in fact, you become the marijuana growing best town because of the great soils or whatever is available in this town, and most of the product you never derive a profit from.
Right.
So my understanding is that when it's harvested at a higher tax, a good-sized tax rate also,
You mean when it goes out the door?
when it goes out the door.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, when it's processed. And that does make sense when you stop and think. I mean, they could be growing it in our town, shipping it out by bales,
Yeah,
and you never see it
as
run
we did
through
with
your
tobacco for
dispensaries.
500 years or whatever. Yeah.
Right, we don't make a dime unless we tax it on retail.
The 3% is on the retail sales.
I'm
That's right.
thinking, I have heard that you back-ended on the harvesting too. And that does sound logical when you
Right.
stop
Yeah.
and think.
Right. John, what are you hearing from the school committee about this
Sure.
subject?
And I do have something I want to present
Okay.
tonight, which I'm not going to read to you, but
Okay.
certainly I want you to be able to share that with the other members. But I'm happy to hear that you're talking about 2 establishments out on 5 and 10. We are very concerned about this. And we do recognize, the school committee recognizes that it was passed by a majority and that the town does see there's a potential financial benefit, as most municipalities see, whether it's a real benefit or not. I
Yeah,
tend to question at times-
there's the real crux of the
I tend
matter.
to question at times if it really is a financial benefit with it.
Right.
But with that said, we've done a lot of work in our schools to try to teach our children of the dangers of marijuana. And you know, there's a lot of research that, you know, we share with our students, that, and I don't need to go into detail today, but talking about looking at regulations, we are very concerned about the possibility of these shops marketing to children. And that's what's happened in other states, and I do have some samples I can show you, basically it's marijuana, which is, you know, consumed, not just smoke, but it's edibles as well, is basically sold as candy. I mean, you know, this is pretty incredible. You see some of these packaging and marketing techniques, they look like candy.
Yep.
So we're very concerned about that.
Recognizing, John, that those candies, whether they, I mean, they're going to come out at Northampton or Amherst or wherever. I mean, they're going to, I mean, that's an issue that you have with the.
I know that, we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
control of what goes on in Hatfield.
Right.
But, you know, we don't want to send our kids a mixed message. In 2017, there was a Spiffy survey done. Spiffy did a survey of all students in Hampshire County in grades 8, 10, and 12. And there was a direct correlation between the number of students that tried marijuana and their parents' or adults in their lives' attitudes towards marijuana. The more favorable the adults in their lives' attitude was towards marijuana, the more likely the kids would use it and try it. So we don't want to send a mixed message. We're telling our kids, this isn't good stuff. But yet at the same time, if we're promoting it in a community, we can't control what goes on in Northampton, I understand that, or Amherst or South Hadley. We can control what goes on in Hatfield. So I just want to send our kids a mixed message. You talked about 500 feet. The school committee is actually requesting that you consider a half-mile moratorium of any kind of shops or any kind of sales within a half a mile of the schools. And the reason being is that we are looking to avoid those schools, those streets that our children walk to school on. And we have a lot of students that walk to school.
West Hatfield would be a half mile, wouldn't it? Or
It would
better?
be, yes, I was happy to hear that.
Yeah.
But I'm just telling you that,
Yeah.
we looked at a half a
Yeah,
mile.
right, okay.
Which, we also are asking that the board empower local law enforcement and the Board of Health to conduct local compliance inspections of these places, to make sure that they are not selling underage. And also to disallow home delivery of recreational marijuana, which is done in some communities. Because we have no control over who's at home and who may be receiving this at home. So that's a real concern that we have.
Home delivery, that's a new wrinkle, huh?
And also to look at maintaining a 21 or older entry on any on-premise social consumption sites in town.
Yeah, so actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, John. We actually have amongst ourselves discussed that we would actually not allow any on-site consumption in Hatfield, that they'd only be off-site premise sales.
Yeah, that was batting around.
There has been talk in various communities about private clubs having smoking lounges, and I know some communities have written in the bylaw that that is prohibited.
We can certainly add that. We were thinking that we would only allow, and again, it gets to the point, perhaps, John, that you were raising, is that, you know, if the store's in Northampton and someone in Hatfield wants to go buy something, they'll go to Northampton to buy it. The people who buy stuff in Hatfield, there's a good chance they're not even from Hatfield. They're just on their way through town on Route 5 or whatever. So to the extent that we can keep it as just like a package store, an off-premise purchase, sale, and not on-site consumption.
I know some discussion has been focused around signage on the retail establishments as minimal.
Yeah, so we have, we actually,
And grow facilities actually just identified by a street address.
yeah, so
not a
no,
target.
so we have right now, we've added, no signage, displays, or artwork at a marijuana establishment shall state, depict, or include the words marijuana or cannabis or any marijuana plants produced and or paraphernalia.
Yeah, very good.
So it would be basically, you know,
You gotta know what's there.
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much.
yeah. I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
No.
Now, is this something that you have to share, that you're going to leave with the
Yeah, I'll
board?
leave
Okay,
that.
that'd be great. That's great.
What's the consensus of the of the planning board and I guess everybody in this room, is this something we're moving forward on? That there's going to be marijuana or manufacturing, cultivation, or retail in the town of Hatfield?
Well, the problem stems from back when we voted. You want to talk about mixed message? We sent the mixed message back last May.
Because of the closeness of the.
Yeah, because of the closeness of the vote.
But we're between a rock and a hard place at this point in time. We're kind of backed into a corner. We pass bylaws, or we try to go for a ban. If it doesn't pass, we have no bylaws. If we try to postpone, we have no bylaws. So on and so forth. So we're, at this point in time, we are, because of the dates, the hard dates we're up against, we are between a rock and a hard place. So if we're allowing it, we regulate it. And we regulate it to the
To the
maximum
max, that's
amount
right,
we
to
could
the max,
possibly do
right.
under the law. I mean,
Exactly.
I don't see any other argument at this point in time.
I think John's points are all very valid too, and reasons for concern. Whether somebody applies in that period of time and it skates under and you get two that locate anywhere, that, I would think that's highly unlikely.
No, I think you're right, Kyle. I don't want to speak for the rest of the board, and I'll let Paul certainly speak for himself. But what I will say is that the board, in addressing this and recognizing that this was happening, we felt it was our responsibility to be prepared, depending upon whatever the town decided, whether the select board and the town at town meeting decided to go a different route. We wanted to make sure that we were researching this and on top of it. I can't necessarily say how each individual board member feels about marijuana and the sale and whether or not that's something they are for or against. But I think it is fair to say that we've acknowledged that this is happening. And, you know, while other towns are considering bans and moratoriums, certainly towns in our immediate vicinity are not. And if there is the opportunity for us to, you know, assess this 3%, and as you said, regulate and maintain, you know, sort of a strict cap on how many facilities or and establishments can be in town, you know, there's opportunity there. You know, Route 5 and the interstate interchange is, you know, Hatfield happens to have perhaps one of the best, you know, interstate interchanges in the immediate area in terms of retail.
I don't take any position for or against. I mean, overwhelmingly, I think people in this country, in Massachusetts especially, and in neighboring states have pretty much said they don't care about marijuana. As for the mixed messages with the school and everybody else, it is what it is. The overwhelming people, the voters everywhere, have said they just don't care about marijuana. So with that being said, with our options on the board, if we don't pass the bylaws this town meeting, so if we don't assess the 3%, if we don't take care of the zoning issues and the restrictions, and if we don't do those things, if we try to do something else and fail, then we could possibly have unregulated or you know.
You got no chance at all.
We have no chance at
That's
all.
right.
We now have nothing, because if the state issues permits, two permits, these are two permits that can do whatever they want.
Right.
Or not whatever they want, but stuff we might not want.
Right.
So the only option here is to permit and regulate at this point in time. I mean, I guess that's my point. It needs to be made because it doesn't seem like there's much more to discuss other than we need to permit and regulate it or take a chance.
Right.
So on the ballot, would you have a choice for a moratorium and a choice for the accepting the bylaw, or just the bylaw?
So whether or not there's a ballot or a warrant article on the moratorium, that's not up to
To us.
us. That would be up to the Board of Selectmen perhaps, or maybe a petition of voters or whatever. But our responsibility is to put together a solid zoning bylaw and have that on the warrant article.
Yeah, there's 5 of us on the board, so 2 of us maybe say, I don't want any part of marijuana.
Right.
But that's not the point here. The point is to try to protect the town of Hatfield against
just
what
want-
could happen
Yes.
if we have nothing.
I agree
Okay.
100%, yeah.
And I would say, now that the football's been kicked around enough in this town, I'll bet you, if you put a ban on the ballot, the town would ban marijuana. You wanna make a little bet?
No bets, because that's something horrible to bet with, isn't it? Because if they don't
No,
pass it.
but I got a feeling that when they said yes to marijuana, it wasn't gonna be here in their backyard. Right, Kyle?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Nobody thought that medical marijuana.
Marijuana was gonna
opening
be
the door.
here, that they were gonna grow it here, that we were gonna have to protect ourselves from the growing and the distribution and the sale here. That was gonna be somewhere else in the state.
Oh, yeah.
That's my feeling
Well,
towards it.
I mean, to Kyle's point with the good soil, I mean, we grow many things now.
They're even talking about small lot craft marijuana, like craft beer.
Craft beer, yeah.
Well, there is a, so one of the establishments, one of the definitions of an establishment is a craft co-op,
Yeah, exactly.
which would enable.
Yeah, but don't they have to go by the regulations of the fencing and the locks
Yeah,
and
yeah,
all the
no.
whole? I mean, even if they're a half an acre, they still have to go by that, right?
Well, they would, well, the
I
actual.
mean, you could make, even that on the growing or any of that, you could make minimum lot sizes too, which, you know,
Well,
but
the
you
lo-
can't unnecessarily regulate.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, so the licensing actually for cultivation is, tier 1 is up to 1,000 square feet of canopy. I mean, that's not much at all. And even tier 4 is 10,000 and over square feet of canopy. Well, that's only a quarter of an acre. You know, now that doesn't necessarily have to be outside, it can
That's
be
not even
indoors.
enough money Paul and I would even bother with it.
Heck, no, throw it away.
Or, be indoor, whether or not that was indoors or not. I guess the thing is, for me, anyway, is that, as you pointed out, the state voted this, while it wasn't an overwhelming vote in Hatfield, it was voted overwhelmingly statewide. So, the state is dealing with it, it's addressing it, it's looking at it as an opportunity for business, for taxes. If not in our backyard, if it's not grown here, if it's not manufactured here, if it's not sold here, that doesn't mean that people in Hatfield aren't going to go somewhere else.
Oh,
to
no,
go.
no, I wasn't
Yeah,
trying to
my
say
point-
that.
My point is merely that we don't get stuck with the short end of the stick here because,
That you have a cop at that facility 24/7, where's your payroll going, you
Well,
gotta look at all of that
yeah, I
stuff.
just-
And Kyle's gonna be a hell of a lot more interested in fencing and all this other jazz than he's been.
Board of Health gets very busy with these, is my understanding.
Oh, the Board of Health is the,
Inventorying the material.
but that's where those impact things come into
That's
play
where the
up
host
front,
agreements
so
come
on
in.
and so
That's
forth
where
with
get out
the
ahead of
host
it.
agreement. Again, I think for the people of the town of Hatfield, we almost need to be in protection phase at this point in time, and with these options, because the options are, can we moratorium it till December and then have more discussions with people? If we can, terrific. If we can't, and the state issues a permit, June 1st for something, we now are not regulating it.
Right.
And we're not collecting anything on it, so we lose.
And I think that's a higher risk.
If we try to ban it and it doesn't happen, we lose.
Right.
So there's a lot of loss that can take place here because of the time frame.
My hope is that we would be able to put together a reasonable and a reasonable enough zoning bylaw that waiting 9 months to do that would be superfluous. It's why, why? I mean, we're only going to just sort of kick the can around a little bit longer and come up with the same set of zoning bylaws. I mean, if we've heard from the school committee as to what their concerns are, recognizing that perhaps they would just as soon not have anything like this at all, but we understand, distances away from schools, distances away from residences, limiting it within certain zones, even within our broader business zones, we limit it within those areas.
I agree with the chief that we don't want to take the risk of not being in front of this, and, because I feel comfortable with what I've heard here tonight. And I have enough faith that you're gonna keep the children in mind as you go forward, and our concerns. That's what we want to make sure our concerns are heard and considered when we do these regulations. But I do think we're taking a chance by not doing anything.
Right.
Well, we talked about houses of worship, we talked about a lot of things in our meetings, our planning board meetings, that, you gotta stay away from this and you gotta stay away from that. And the only real part of Hatfield that can condone it is out in West Hatfield. And you say, what's out there? Well, Sisters. Well, Sisters is no good because there's apartments above it, within 300 feet. So, I mean, it's a very small
Well, but
part of where they can put it.
Right, but that's
In
not to
town.
say that one of those buildings out there isn't repurposed.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah. Steve Beltran all of a sudden isn't selling heaters. He's out.
Wallet.
What's that?
Yeah.
These guys come into town
Yeah.
with a deep wallet.
Yeah.
I've seen some numbers thrown around and it would shock you what they're willing to pay.
Right, so I think that we're.
For land or for buildings?
Oh,
Yeah, so what we're looking at is just like, any one of these buildings can be repurposed and they're out.
Yeah.
The fact that it
Yeah.
happens to be, a physical therapy location now doesn't mean that it's.
Or
gonna
the
be a physical-
motel, hotel
yeah,
that's out
physical
there,
ther-
whatever, yeah.
Therapy all the time. But, yeah, being out in front of it so that we can be prepared for it, I think provides us with that kind of protection. It also then provides us perhaps with the opportunity to take advantage of what might be out there too in terms of, the.
So the consensus permit and regulate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, the tier usage. If I'm a farmer in town and how many landowners own the meadows? How many?
Oh, who knows?
I mean, there's a bunch.
Yeah, yeah.
They have agreements with farmers now, right, for corn, potatoes, this, that, or for the other thing. But if marijuana growers come in town and pay, I don't know, 100 times more lease money for that property, there's no potatoes, corn, peppers, whatever, onions being grown now. It's marijuana because each landowner, is each parcel of land down there, 10, 15, 20 acre parcel, 5 acre parcel, there's all different sizes, but are they all entitled now to a canopy of 1,000 square feet?
well, if you're requiring it grown indoors,
Well,
that's gonna be
but
very
the-
restrictive on that.
But this is what I'm getting at. If each 10 acre parcel is a different landowner and each one of them have a 1,000 square foot canopy, we now have 51,000 square foot canopies of
Each one of those would have to get a license, they would have to,
Yeah.
they'd have to
So,
apply
and
for.
that's only 2 licenses?
No, that's just for retail establishments.
But that's what I'm getting
Yeah,
at. So
right.
if we have all these different establishments coming in and they all get licenses, now we've now taken up, is there a way to regulate that from happening?
So,
You can limit the number of grow
we
facilities.
can limit the number of grow facilities. In fact, some of the recommendations are to not go that route because the marketplace is going to determine that as well in terms of like how much, what's the saturation rate here?
For one thing, these licenses, my understanding, are not cheap. It's not easy to get through the process of it.
Well, it's not cheap, but also all of the requirements that you have to establish for security. Security and to, and I think that if we were to allow outdoor cultivation, we would definitely require screening. So in addition to the fencing and the security cameras,
Be lit 24 hours.
yeah, I mean, there's going to be a built-in limits to this just because of the amount of expense that's going to go into
But
this.
again, limiting
Yeah.
the number of manufacturing or cultivation areas, essentially our farm ground. Limiting that now, I think makes more sense than trying to figure it out based on the market. Simply because, I mean, nobody's growing marijuana in Ashfield where I live, on my soil, because, well, nothing grows up there except for potatoes and pumpkins.
And
I
rocks,
think the real
and rocks
strain
and
on
stones.
the police
That's right.
department would be more from the grow facilities and somebody trying to illegally enter the grow facilities than somebody risking their license selling to a teenager.
Right.
Or, breaking into a dispensary that's very high security. I would think penetrating the grow facility or a grower would be where you're gonna see
Right.
the chief spending his time.
Well, that and again, money is king, everybody knows it. And if I'm a landowner and somebody wants to pay me a fortune for my 5 or 10 acres of land, they're getting it in this area where the soil is perfect. That's what I'm getting at. If we restrict that, we can restrict that from happening we can restrict multiple licenses, 10 licenses, 15 licenses happening, and now we've got 15,000 square feet of different growers in town that are growing marijuana, and we no longer have that ground for what has historically been grown here, cultivated here.
Right, so, so it's very clear in the instructions that we've gotten so far from the Attorney General's office and from the Cannabis Control Commission that we can limit the number of retail units, the number of retail facilities. It's not as clear about restricting of manufacturing and grow facilities and cultivators. I will look into that. I will actually seek advice on that because I think those are very good, very valid points.
You'll have a new flavor of potato chip coming from Hatfield.
Yeah.
Right, well, I mean, the farmers are going, they will suffer if that's the case, if it's a backdoor is what it is. It's a
Well-
backdoor to getting in there and,
Well, the Ag Commission did offer a forum tonight to the farmers to come in and talk about what their interests are in perhaps considering growing marijuana, the farmers that are here now as opposed to someone coming in from outside. And we didn't have anybody show up. So I'm not sure if that's an indication of their lack of interest or whatever. I do know that there was an article in the Daily Hampshire Gazette about a month ago interviewing farmers in Whately, and they...
Well, Jimmy Pachesnik's all for it.
they
He's going to
seem
go for
pretty
it. We're here, he doesn't own any land in Hatfield.
They're
So.
pretty excited about the prospect of actually putting in some...
there's a ton of money in it.
Yeah.
But if all we're doing is growing 1,000 acres of marijuana in Hatfield, that's what we're known for, I mean, I don't know, I guess that's up to the town at that point in time. But if it's restricted to maybe the industrial area or the commercial area of West Street, that limits it right there.
Well, there's not much in the way of grow land out there. I guess now I'm going to wear my old hat on before I got retired. I worked for 35 years on farmland protection issues. And the thing about farmland is that it comes and goes in crops. I mean, at one time it was all tobacco here, and then it was all turf, and then it was potatoes, and then it was, it were pickles for a long time. And,
Oh, yeah,
and
cucumbers for a long time.
a lot of potatoes. It's a fungible resource in that it can come and go in different, but once you put houses on it, you're not going to grow anything else on it. So if some of this land is growing marijuana for a while and that's keeping it in farming, for whatever the next best agricultural product is, that there's opportunity there too. So,
Kyle, have you had any questions about anybody coming in wanting to ask you about that, or?
Yes,
Oh, you have?
yeah. I've been contacted by 3 growers. One as far away as Arizona.
Really?
and Marlene indicated that she's been contacted by someone, or maybe you too, Kyle, that wants about a manufacturing facility too, right?
I had one for a manufacturing facility and then 2 that are just interested in dispensary or retail establishment.
But no growers?
I've had nobody local except for one party that, talked briefly about it growing.
And somebody from Arizona?
Yeah.
So there are people that are interested in growing. So again, I mean, my point is if
Arizona was retail.
retail.
Yeah.
If people want to, I mean, if the farmers in this community want to grow marijuana, more power to them, or make as much money as they can. The point of my asking this is because the parcels, especially in the meadows, I think there's 40 or 50 owners that own the meadows.
Right.
There is, at least.
At least.
There may be only 3 or 4 people who farm that land, but there's probably
But
40
they-
or 50 owners.
And that farmland is leased by the
Right,
farmers.
right.
If 40 or 50 owners can make $1 million,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to do it. Now you've got 40 or 50 separate cultivation.
Well, that's where it comes into too. You could just be growing and shipping out product, creating issues for Hatfield, and then you're never receiving.
And we
revenue.
get
Right,
nothing. That's,
right.
so I don't know if there's a way to deal with that.
Okay, well
part of
that,
it. That's
I
those
think
are-
that is
no-
somehow handled through the inventory of the plants. I think
Right.
that's part of why you inventory.
Right, so that's a good point. We will seek our general counsel's advice, as well as I've been talking to some, the individuals who were actually involved in the adoption of the referendum, who have been now assisting communities and municipalities from a legal perspective as to what they can and can't do. So we'll look into that.
Yeah, I mean, our situation's kind of unique, because of so many different owners of land and parcels and everything else. It's not like we have owners that own, 4,000 acres of land in town, one owner, you know what I mean, so.
Yeah, no, very good point. That and manufacturing as well. Yeah.
It would seem like the grow would be like the tobacco farms back in the day. Big farms with, or a big amount of cultivation under a lot of different areas in town.
Really, I don't know enough about the growing of this, but it would seem to me that growing it in a controlled environment would be a better way to do it anyway, just because you can control the environment and you can better control the risk of trespass and theft than dealing with it on in an outdoor kind of setting. But
What about?
I'm sure it would be difficult to come up with security to keep a field secure in the middle of the night, that somebody could disable the system and take your whole crop,
Well, what about multiple crops under cover? I mean, here, you're only gonna get one I don't know how quickly it grows. I guess it grows
I
real.
have a
Right.
lot of photos of growing, and it's all done indoors.
Almost all
You only
inside.
be able to grow 8 months a year or
Yeah.
something,
Yeah, right, you got, yeah.
right,
They want to make money year round.
right,
Yep.
right. And you have more control over it. You have,
Yeah.
it's a secure environment.
We have the largest climate-controlled refrigerated warehouse in New England, in Hatfield.
Largest what?
Climate-controlled refrigerated warehouse,
Yeah,
is
You have a
CNS.
crop
Right.
right.
CNS, yeah.
They- And
Yeah.
and we are also, now the library annex is also climate-controlled.
right,
That's exactly, it's those,
kind of facilities.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, well, we'll look into that. In fact, we even discussed whether or not we should even allow outdoor cultivation at all. So, and that's why I was hoping that if we heard
I
from,
would recommend against that strongly.
recommend against what?
Outdoor cultivation.
Outdoor cultivation?
I think it's high risk for teenagers or young people getting in there, or anybody. The chief is opening his police department up to a world of problems. I think.
Open, yeah.
Yeah.
That's just inviting problems.
It's just not commonly done. I could see,
Can we restrict that,
maybe
Tom?
later on take a look at that.
I think we can. We definitely need to look into that, but I think that is a possibility. Well, and that was one of the hopes, if there were farmers in town who came forward and said, we're really interested in doing this, but we want to do it in an open field setting. Well, I don't necessarily want to tie the hands of someone who wants to do that agriculturally in town, but we didn't hear from anybody.
Right.
So,
Again, something we should be ahead of, and
Right.
and when it comes up, we shouldn't have shocked faces.
Right.
Or know what to do next.
good, yeah, no, we'll look into that, because Paul just asked if we can specifically restrict or eliminate outdoor cultivation.
I believe you can.
Yeah,
You think we can?
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and, the challenge is too,
Haven't the other communities done that? I believe they have, haven't they?
I haven't seen anything specifically on, most of the articles that I've been reading have been about retail.
Retail, rather than
and
growing, yeah.
Retail and on-site consumption. Those have been the big issues. And as you probably have read here recently, the governor and others have actually said to the commission, go slow on this on-site consumption. Don't, sort of put the brakes on that, and I'm not sure what the commission's going to do.
Well, I mean, everybody's revving along here for the retail part of it because of the 3% tax.
Right.
And in a city the size of Springfield, that's a lot of money.
Right. And potentially a lot of locations.
Yeah, the town killer here, the killer for Hatfield is the other stuff. All the other things, the manufacturing, the cultivation, the loss of the land, potentially, so. Yeah, I don't know, that's where we're at. I mean, you guys got a lot of work ahead of you, you've done a lot.
No, we do. I mean, and it comes down to, I mean, it's sort of a challenge. I mean, if farmers or those landowners are looking at other options, you know, if they're down in the flats, then, you know, maybe the floodplain and other restrictions there would not necessarily make that land accessible or vulnerable to development, but
Right.
they could all be solar panels too out there.
Well, I mean, if we take 5, 6, 7, 800, 1,000 acres away from some of these farmers, what's that gonna do to them?
Right.
You know, if we don't, at least have some type of a thought process behind it.
Well, yeah.
20 acres of solar panels probably makes more tax revenue, actually.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Probably does.
So, all right, well, I appreciate everybody's input. This has been really helpful. John, you have something you want to leave with us? Okay. So this was not an official meeting, so we don't have to call the meeting to a close.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Yeah. Okay, so we'll close it out for tonight.